Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to discover that the man you're about to marry is a professional con artist? What would you do if you found out 3 weeks before your wedding that your perfect fiancé had stolen millions from other women just like you? Would you run away and hide in shame, or would you fight back? I thought I knew the answers to those questions. I was wrong about everything. My name is Sarah, and I'm 52 years old. It's been 3 years since my husband passed away. My children have grown up and moved on with their own lives. My daughter Emma works as a marketing manager at a tech company in San Francisco, and my son Jake moved to Austin to build his career as a software developer. The house in suburban Chicago became too quiet, and the mirror reflected a woman who had forgotten what it meant to feel desired. Every morning, I would wake up in an empty king-sized bed, have breakfast alone while scrolling through news on my iPad, and drive to my office downtown. My position as Chief Financial Officer at Morrison Construction, one of Chicago's largest building companies, demanded complete dedication, and I threw myself into spreadsheets, quarterly reports, and board meetings. It helped me not think about the fact that no one was waiting for me at home in our spacious colonial house on Maple Street. I spent my evenings watching Netflix series or reading books in the living room that still smelled faintly of Robert's cologne. Sometimes I met with my book club friends at Starbucks on Michigan Avenue, but conversations inevitably turned to children, grandchildren, and husbands. I would remain silent, smile politely, and feel like someone watching other people's lives through frosted glass. On weekends, I cleaned a house that seemed ridiculously oversized for one person. Robert had bought this 5-bedroom colonial when Emma and Jake were in middle school, dreaming of hosting big family gatherings and holiday celebrations. Now 3 bedrooms stood empty, and I still couldn't bring myself to clear out his home office. His business books, financial journals, and favorite leather recliner by the bay window still held his presence like a shrine. Robert died on a Tuesday morning in March, a massive heart attack in the parking lot of his accounting firm. At 51, when we thought we had decades ahead of us. We had been married for 26 years, high school sweethearts who met at homecoming and never looked back. I thought we'd grow old together, travel to all those places we'd bookmarked on Pinterest, maybe buy a beach house in Florida for retirement. All those dreams shattered in the space between a phone call and a race to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The first year after his death passed in a haze of grief, counseling, legal paperwork, and learning to manage finances I'd always left to him. I mechanically performed my duties at Morrison Construction, attended Emma and Jake's college graduations via video call due to COVID, and tried to understand how to exist in a world that suddenly felt alien and cold. The second year was marginally easier. The sharp, breathless panic attacks became less frequent, replaced by a persistent ache that settled in my chest like permanent weather. I started sleeping on Robert's side of the bed because my side felt too close to the empty space where he should have been. But in the third year, something shifted. I woke up one Saturday morning in October, made my usual single cup of coffee, and realized I missed more than just Robert. I missed being touched. I missed having someone ask about my day and actually listen to the answer. I missed feeling like a woman instead of just a functional machine that attended meetings, paid bills, and kept the house running with clockwork precision. The loneliness hit me hardest in the evenings, when I'd catch myself setting 2 plates on the kitchen counter out of habit, or when I'd see couples at Whole Foods debating over pasta sauce flavors. I'd started talking to Robert's photo on the mantelpiece, telling him about my day, asking his opinion on work decisions. Emma caught me doing it during her Christmas visit and gently suggested I might benefit from expanding my social circle. Mum, you need to start dating, Emma told me during one of our weekly FaceTime calls. She was in her sunny San Francisco apartment, holding her morning latte, while I sat in my dim Chicago kitchen on a grey February evening. You're still young, still beautiful. Dad wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone. You know he wouldn't. I bristled at the suggestion, stirring sugar into my tea with more force than necessary. Emma, honey, where exactly would I meet someone at my age? All the decent men are either married, widowed, and bitter, or carrying enough emotional baggage to fill a cargo plane. Oh, come on! 52 isn't ancient. Look at Jennifer Aniston, Sandra Bullock. They're absolutely stunning. Emma leaned closer to her camera, her expression earnest. Mum, I can see how lonely you are. You think we don't notice because we're across the country. But we notice everything. Jake and I talk about it. We want you to be happy again. And where exactly would I find this mythical, perfect man? At the gym, surrounded by 25-year-olds in sports bras? At work, where everyone knows me as the no-nonsense CFO who never smiles in budget meetings? Try dating apps, Emma suggested, taking a sip of her latte. It's completely normal now. My boss met her husband on Match when she was 47. She thought online dating was for desperate people, but now they've been married 3 years and just bought a house in Marin County. I nearly choked on my tea. Dating apps? Emma, those are full of creeps and con artists. I've seen the stories on 60 Minutes. Mum, you're being dramatic. There are reputable sites for educated professionals. Background checks, income verification, the whole 9 yards. It's not some sketchy hookup app. These are legitimate platforms for serious people looking for real relationships. That evening, after pouring myself a generous glass of the Cabernet Sauvignon that Robert and I had been saving for our 25th anniversary, I opened my MacBook and started researching. Emma had texted me links to several dating sites. Elite Singles marketed itself as for educated professionals seeking meaningful connections. Silver Singles was designed for mature singles over 50. Our Time promised a community where life begins at 50. The whole concept felt surreal and vaguely embarrassing. I was used to meeting people organically, through work, mutual friends, college connections. The idea of creating a profile that essentially advertised my availability felt like posting a classified ad in the Chicago Tribune. Recently widowed CFO seeks companionship. No tire kickers, please. But what did I have to lose besides my dignity? I created an account on Elite Singles, figuring it sounded the most respectable. The site required detailed information: education level, profession, income range, lifestyle preferences. I spent an hour crafting my profile, trying to sound approachable yet accomplished, warm but not desperate. For photos, I chose a professional headshot from last year's Morrison Construction annual report, a casual shot of me at Emma's graduation looking genuinely happy, and a vacation photo from the last trip Robert and I took to Napa Valley, where I was laughing at something he'd said. I looked relaxed and genuinely joyful in that picture, wine glass in hand, sunset painting the vineyard golden behind me. In the About Me section, I wrote, "Successful professional who believes life is meant to be shared. I value intelligence, honesty, and the ability to find humor in everyday moments. Looking for a genuine connection with someone ready for a real relationship. Not interested in games or casual encounters. I know what I want, and I'm not afraid to go after it. I hesitated over the income section. As CFO of a major construction company, I made well into six figures, owned my house outright, and had substantial savings and investments. But advertising wealth seemed like an invitation for gold diggers. I selected prefer not to say and hoped that would filter out the obvious opportunists. The first week brought a flood of messages that ranged from generic to bizarre. "Hey, beautiful, want to chat?" appeared in my inbox 17 times from different men using variations of the same photo, middle-aged guys in fishing boats holding up base like trophies. Others launched immediately into their life stories, bitter divorce tales, health problems, complaints about adult children who never called. One man named Gary sent me a novella about his ex-wife's alleged infidelities and concluded with, "I'm looking for a simple woman who won't cause drama, someone who understands that men need peace in their golden years." Another, calling himself Chicago Champ 69, opened with, "You look like you could use some excitement in your life. I'm very experienced in making women happy, if you know what I mean." The quality was so uniformly disappointing that I began to think Emma was delusional. These men seemed tired, angry, or predatory. Their profiles read like either pity parties or demands lists. Must be fit, no baggage, financially independent but not career obsessed. Want someone who appreciates a traditional gentleman. I was about to delete my account when a message arrived that was different from all the others. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but your profile stopped me in my tracks. In a sea of people trying to present their best angles and highlight reels, you seem refreshingly authentic. Your description of valuing intelligence and humor resonates deeply with me. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for connection. Would you be open to a conversation?" The message came from David Richardson, 49, listed as an architectural consultant from Evanston. His profile photo showed a distinguished man with salt and pepper hair, kind green eyes behind stylish glasses, and a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He was photographed in what looked like an upscale restaurant, wearing a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt. Professional but approachable. His profile was thoughtfully written. He described himself as a restoration specialist who worked with historic buildings throughout the Midwest. Divorced 5 years ago, two teenage children who lived primarily with their mother but spent weekends and holidays with him. He enjoyed architecture, wine tasting, hiking, and classical music. His photos showed him at various cultural events, an art gallery opening, a wine festival, standing in front of what looked like a beautifully restored Victorian mansion. "I help bring old buildings back to life," his profile read. "There's something magical about taking something that's been forgotten or damaged and making it beautiful again." I believe the same principle applies to relationships and people. We all deserve a second chance at happiness. I studied his photos carefully. He looked successful, but not flashy, confident, but not arrogant. In one picture, he was laughing with a group of people at what appeared to be a charity fundraiser. Another showed him with two teenagers, presumably his children, at what looked like a Cubs game. He seemed like the kind of man who belonged in my world. I crafted my response carefully. "David, thank you for such a thoughtful message. I appreciate that you took the time to read my profile rather than sending a generic greeting. I'd be interested in learning more about your work. There's something appealing about preserving history and crafting beauty from something forgotten. Tell me about your most interesting restoration project. His reply came the next morning. Sarah, I'm thrilled you responded. Currently, I'm working on the most challenging and rewarding project of my career, the restoration of the historic Whitmore estate in Lake Forest. It's a 1920s mansion that's been abandoned for 30 years. The family finally decided to restore it as a cultural centre and event space. When I first walked through the property, it was like stepping into a beautiful ruin. Water damage, decay, vandalism. But underneath all that neglect, the bones of something extraordinary. Hand-carved mouldings, stained glass windows, hardwood floors that just needed someone to believe in them again. I've been working on it for 18 months now, and watching it come back to life has been incredibly fulfilling. There's a ballroom with a crystal chandelier that hadn't been lit in decades. Last week, we got the electricity restored and turned it on for the first time. The way the light danced across the restored walls, it was magical. I suppose that's what I'm hoping to find in my personal life too. Something beautiful that just needs the right person to believe in its potential again. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. I found myself looking forward to his messages, which arrived like clockwork each morning around 9 a.m. and evening around 7 p.m. David wrote like someone who read literature, not just sports pages and financial reports. His emails were thoughtful, detailed, peppered with references to books, films, and music that showed genuine cultural sophistication. He told me about his children, Melissa, 16, who was passionate about environmental science and wanted to study marine biology, and Connor, 14, who played violin in his school orchestra. Divorce is hard on kids, but Rebecca and I have worked hard to co-parent effectively. We put the children's needs first, always. I think that's why they're both thriving. When I mentioned my own children, he asked thoughtful follow-up questions. How was Emma adjusting to San Francisco? What kind of software development was Jake doing in Austin? Did we manage to maintain closeness despite the distance? His interest seemed genuine, not perfunctory. Family is everything, he wrote. I know the pain of losing someone you love. When my father passed away from cancer 3 years ago, it devastated our entire family. But it also taught me not to take relationships for granted. Every day we have with the people we care about is a gift. Our conversations gradually became more personal and intimate. David shared the story of his divorce, a marriage that ended not in explosive arguments, but in gradual emotional distance. Rebecca and I grew into different people over 15 years. No infidelity, no betrayals, just two people who realized they wanted different things from life. It was heartbreaking, but necessary. I found myself opening up about Robert, about the unexpected grief that could still knock me breathless 3 years later, about the challenge of learning to be Sarah instead of half of Sarah and Robert. I feel like I'm still figuring out who I am as an individual, I confessed in one late-night email. For 26 years, every major decision was made as part of a team. Now I have to remember what I actually like, what I want, who I am when I'm not being someone's wife or someone's mother. That takes tremendous courage, David replied. Most people are afraid to rediscover themselves. They'd rather stay safely in familiar patterns, even if those patterns no longer serve them. The fact that you're here, putting yourself out there, shows incredible strength. His messages made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years, not just as a successful CFO or devoted mother, but as a complex woman with dreams, fears, and desires. David seemed to understand that I was more than my resume or my tragic backstory. I've been thinking about what you said about feeling like you're still discovering who you are, he wrote one evening. Maybe that's the most exciting part, the possibility of becoming someone even better than you were before, not replacing who you were, but adding new dimensions. After 3 weeks of daily correspondence, David suggested we meet in person. Sarah, I feel like we've built a foundation of real communication, but I'd love to take the next step. Would you be comfortable meeting for dinner? I know a wonderful place in Evanston, Campagnola, an Italian restaurant that's intimate but not too quiet. What do you think? I stared at his message for 20 minutes before responding. The last time I'd been on a first date, Clinton was president and smartphones didn't exist. But something about David felt safe, genuine. His messages revealed a man who was thoughtful, cultured, emotionally mature. I'd like that very much, I replied. Saturday evening works well for me. I spent the entire week in a state of nervous anticipation that reminded me of being 16. I got highlights at my usual salon in Lincoln Park, bought a new dress from Nordstrom, elegant but not too formal, a deep blue wrap dress that Emma assured me via FaceTime was absolutely perfect, very flattering. I even splurged on new lingerie, though I had no intention of anyone seeing it. It just made me feel more confident. Saturday evening, I drove to Evanston in my BMW, hands slightly trembling on the steering wheel. Campagnola turned out to be exactly as David had described. Upscale but welcoming, with warm lighting and the kind of atmosphere where you could have a real conversation. I arrived 5 minutes early and was shown to a corner table. David was already there, standing when I approached. In person, he was even more attractive than his photos suggested. Tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of presence that suggested quiet confidence. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine, and when he looked at me, I felt like I was the only person in the restaurant. "Sarah, you look absolutely stunning," he said, helping me into my chair. "That color is perfect on you." The evening unfolded like a dream. David was charming without being smooth, interesting without being pretentious. He ordered wine with the casual expertise of someone who actually knew about vintages, not someone showing off. When I mentioned I wasn't very knowledgeable about wine, he spent 10 minutes explaining the basics without a trace of condescension. "The most important thing about wine," he said, swirling his glass, "is whether you enjoy it. All the technical knowledge in the world doesn't matter if you don't like how it tastes." We talked about everything. He shared funny stories from his restoration projects, discovering love letters from the 1940s hidden in the walls of a historic home, finding a Prohibition-era speakeasy in the basement of a mansion in Winnetka, the eccentric millionaire who insisted on installing a secret passage behind a bookshelf. "Architecture tells stories," he said, cutting his osso buco with precise movements. "Every building has a history, secrets, dreams built into its foundation. My job is to honor that history while making it functional for modern life." When I told him about the challenges of being a woman in the male-dominated construction industry, he listened with genuine interest. I can only imagine how difficult that must be. The building trades can be pretty old-fashioned in their attitudes, but from what you're telling me about your company's success, It sounds like you've earned their respect through sheer competence. He asked about Robert, but not in a way that felt intrusive or comparative. It must have been a wonderful marriage to still grieve so deeply. That speaks well of both of you. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing completely for the first time in months. David had a way of making me feel interesting, attractive, worthy of attention. When he laughed at my stories about corporate board meetings and difficult clients, it felt genuine, not polite. "You have a remarkable sense of humor," he said over dessert. We were sharing tiramisu like teenagers. "I love that you can find the absurdity in serious situations. That's a rare quality." When he walked me to my car, there was an awkward moment where we both seemed unsure about the appropriate goodbye. He solved it by gently taking my hand and kissing my cheek. "I had a wonderful evening, Sarah. I hope we can do this again soon." I drove home feeling lighter than I had in 3 years. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt like myself again. Not the grieving widow, not the all-business CFO, just Sarah. A woman who could still laugh, still feel butterflies, still imagine possibilities. David called the next morning. I couldn't stop thinking about last night. "Would you be interested in going to the Art Institute next Saturday? There's a new exhibition on Frank Lloyd Wright that I think you'd enjoy." Thus began what could only be described as courtship in the most traditional sense. David pursued me with the patience and attention of someone who understood that trust needed to be built gradually. He never pressured me for physical intimacy, never made assumptions about my availability or interest level. Our second date at the Art Institute was even better than dinner. David's knowledge of architecture made the Wright exhibition come alive. He explained the principles behind Prairie School design, pointed out details I would have missed, shared stories about seeing some of Wright's buildings in person. Wright believed that buildings should grow naturally from their site, he said, standing before a model of falling water. Architecture shouldn't fight with nature. It should complement it. He was 50 years ahead of his time in terms of sustainable design. After the museum, we walked through Grant Park, despite the chilly March weather. David bought us hot chocolate from a vendor, and we sat on a bench overlooking the lake, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his dreams of one day opening his own firm, specializing in historic preservation. I shared my secret ambition to write a book about women in business, something I'd never mentioned to anyone. "You should absolutely write that book," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You have such a unique perspective, and your story could inspire other women. Have you started outlining it?" By our fifth date, I was thoroughly smitten. David continued to surprise me with his thoughtfulness. Flowers delivered to my office with handwritten notes, reservations at restaurants he'd researched specifically because they served dishes he remembered me mentioning I enjoyed, tickets to a Chicago symphony performance because I'd casually mentioned loving classical music. But it wasn't the grand gestures that won me over. It was the small attentions, the way he remembered that I took my coffee with cream but no sugar, how he always opened car doors and helped me with my coat without making it feel patronizing. The fact that he actually listened when I spoke and referenced our previous conversations in later discussions. "You mentioned last week that you were worried about Emma feeling isolated in San Francisco," he said during dinner at Alinea, the legendary restaurant where he'd somehow secured impossible to get reservations. "Have you talked to her since then?" The physical attraction grew gradually but intensely. David never rushed anything, but the chemistry between us was undeniable. when he finally kissed me, really kissed me, after our sixth date. It was like waking up from a long sleep. We were standing in my driveway after an evening at the Lyric Opera, and he cupped my face gently before leaning down to kiss me, with a passion that left me breathless. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he murmured against my lips. "What took you so long?" I whispered back, surprising myself with my boldness. Our first night together happened naturally, without pressure or awkwardness. David came inside after our seventh date, ostensibly for coffee, but we both knew it was about more than caffeine. He made love to me with the same patience and attention he brought to everything else, slowly, thoroughly, making sure I felt cherished and desired. Afterward, lying in his arms in my bed that had been empty for 3 years, I felt like I was finally inhabiting my own life again, instead of just going through the motions. "You're incredible," he whispered, stroking my hair. "I can't believe how lucky I am to have found you." David began staying over regularly. Having someone in the house again felt miraculous. The sound of the shower running in the morning, coffee brewing when I came downstairs, another voice answering when telemarketers called. He was considerate about my space and routines, never assuming or taking over, but his presence made the house feel like a home again instead of a mausoleum. 2 months into our relationship, David introduced me to his children. Melissa and Connor came for dinner on a Sunday, and I was nervous about their reaction to their father's new girlfriend. But David had prepared them well, and they were polite, curious, and ultimately accepting. "Dad's been really happy lately," Melissa confided when we were clearing dishes together. "He smiles a lot more than he used to." Connor, shyer than his sister, bonded with me over a shared love of mystery novels. "My dad said you run a big company. That's pretty cool. Do you boss people around all day?" "Sometimes," I laughed. "But mostly I try to help people solve problems and make good decisions." A month later, David met Emma and Jake when they both came home for Memorial Day weekend. I was anxious about their approval, not because I needed permission, but because their happiness mattered to me. Emma was immediately charmed. "Mum, he's wonderful. He looks at you like Dad used to, like you're the most interesting person in the room." Jake, ever the analyst, grilled David about his business, his finances, and his intentions. But by the end of the weekend, even Jake was won over. "He's solid, Mum. Good instincts, good values. And most importantly, he makes you happy. I haven't seen you smile this much since, well, in a long time." By the 4th of July, David and I were talking about the future. Not marriage, necessarily, but shared plans. A trip to Europe we wanted to take together. The possibility of moving in together at some point, meeting each other's extended families. "I know it's been less than 6 months," David said as we watched fireworks from the roof deck of his Evanston townhouse. "But I love you, Sarah. I love your intelligence, your strength, your humor. I love how you make me want to be better than I am." "I love you too," I replied, and meant it completely. On my birthday in August, David surprised me with a weekend getaway to a restored inn in Door County, Wisconsin. The Whitman Inn was exactly the kind of place he would choose. Historically significant, beautifully renovated, romantic without being cheesy. "I wanted to show you one of my earlier projects," he said as we walked through the lobby with its gleaming hardwood floors and original tin ceiling. "This place was falling down when I started working on it 5 years ago. Now look at it." The inn was indeed spectacular. Our room had a fireplace, a clawfoot tub, and windows overlooking Green Bay. We spent the weekend antiquing, wine tasting, and talking about everything and nothing. On Saturday night, over dinner at a restaurant where David had somehow secured the best table in the house, he became unusually serious. Sarah, I need to tell you something. These past 6 months have been the happiest of my life since my kids were born. You've made me remember what it feels like to be truly excited about the future. He reached across the table and took my hand. I know we said we were taking things slowly, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. I want us to be together, officially and permanently. He pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. Not the massive diamond that young women typically received, but an elegant vintage piece with a stunning emerald surrounded by small diamonds. It's from the 1920s, David explained. I found it at an estate sale from the Whitmore Mansion project. The moment I saw it, I thought of you. Will you marry me, Sarah? I cried. Actually sobbed with happiness in the middle of an upscale restaurant, while other diners pretended not to stare. At 52, I was getting a second chance at love, and it felt like a miracle. Yes, I managed to say through my tears. Yes, absolutely yes. We decided on a December wedding. Intimate, elegant, just family and close friends. David wanted to have the ceremony at the Whitmore estate, which would be completed by then. Our first dance in the ballroom where I had my revelation about second chances, he said. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of planning. David was involved in every detail, which surprised me. Robert had been happy to let me handle social arrangements, but David had opinions about flowers, music, menu selections. He wanted everything to be perfect. This is the only wedding I'm ever planning again, he said, reviewing catering proposals with the intensity of someone studying architectural blueprints. It has to be exactly right. I was touched by his investment in our special day. He arranged for his children to participate in the ceremony, found a string quartet that could play both classical pieces and contemporary songs, even researched the historical significance of the estate so he could incorporate meaningful details into our vows. 3 weeks before the wedding, my friend Patricia called with excitement in her voice. Patricia worked for a private investigation firm that did background checks for major corporations, and we'd been friends since college. Sarah, I just got back from a conference in Las Vegas. I have to show you something, but you need to come to my office. Can you make time this week? Something in her tone made my stomach clench. Patricia, what's going on? You're scaring me. Just come see me. Tomorrow, if possible. And don't mention this conversation to David yet. I drove to Patricia's office in the Loop the next morning, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe she'd found something minor in David's past. A bankruptcy, a lawsuit, some small financial issue that wouldn't change anything but should be disclosed. Patricia's expression when I walked into her office told me it was worse than a financial problem. Sarah, sit down. What I'm about to show you is going to be devastating. She opened a thick folder on her desk. Your David Richardson isn't named David Richardson. His real name is Marcus Thompson, and he's a professional con artist who specializes in wealthy, single women. The room started spinning. That's impossible. You must have the wrong person. I wish I did. Patricia pulled out photographs, documents, newspaper clippings. Marcus Thompson, also known as David Richardson, Michael Stevens, and Jonathan Walsh. He's been running romance scams for at least 7 years. His victims are always successful women between 40 and 60 who've recently lost their husbands or gone through expensive divorces. The evidence was overwhelming and sickening. Photos of David with different women using different names at different weddings. Newspaper articles about Marcus Thompson's arrest in Phoenix for grand theft and fraud. Police reports detailing his methods, lengthy courtships, expensive gifts, marriage proposals, then disappearance after gaining access to bank accounts, retirement funds, and property deeds. His last victim was a doctor in Denver named Catherine Walsh, Patricia explained, pulling out a police report. 51 years old, widowed, successful cardiology practice. She lost $2.3 million, sold her practice, liquidated her retirement accounts, even took out a second mortgage on her house to invest in his fake restoration business. I stared at the photos of Catherine Walsh. She looked like me, professional, attractive, successful. In the wedding photos, she looked radiantly happy, just as I had been planning to look in 3 weeks. "How did you find this?" I whispered. "Pure coincidence. At the conference, I was having drinks with a colleague from Denver. She mentioned a case they'd worked on involving a romance scammer who targeted professional women. When she described him, something clicked. I asked her to send me the file. Patricia pulled out more documents. The Whitmore estate? It exists, but it's not his project. The real restoration is being done by Morrison and Associates. Ironically, they're one of your company's competitors. Marcus somehow gained access to the property, probably through fake credentials. He's been using it as a prop. Everything was a lie. The man I loved, who made me feel alive again, who promised me a future, none of it was real. He was a professional predator who had studied me, identified my vulnerabilities, and constructed an elaborate fiction designed to separate me from my money. But as the initial shock faded, it was replaced by something else: cold, calculated fury. I had spent my entire career making tough decisions, managing crises, outmaneuvering competitors. Marcus Thompson had made one critical error in his victim selection. He assumed that a lonely widow would be too embarrassed and heartbroken to fight back. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. "Patricia, I need everything you have on him. Every document, every report, every piece of evidence, and I need you to help me contact his previous victims." "Sarah, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Marcus Thompson picked the wrong woman to mess with." That evening, I had dinner with David as planned. He was his usual charming self, discussing final wedding details, showing me photos of the completed Whitmore ballroom, talking about our honeymoon plans in Tuscany. "The ballroom looks incredible," he said, showing me pictures on his phone. "The chandelier restoration came out even better than I hoped. Our first dance is going to be magical." I smiled and nodded, playing my part while studying this man I thought I knew. How had I missed the signs? Were there signs? Or was he simply that good at his con? "I have a surprise for you," I said, pulling out some bank documents I'd prepared. "I wanted to give you an early wedding gift." The papers showed a transfer of $500,000 to a joint account I'd opened. "It's for our future together. The down payment on that house we talked about in Lake Forest. Or seed money for your own firm. Whatever you want." I watched his eyes carefully as he processed the information. For just a split second, I saw it. A flash of greed, of triumph, quickly covered by a mask of overwhelmed gratitude. Sarah, this is too generous. You don't need to. I want to, I interrupted. I love you, and I want us to build something beautiful together. He kissed me tenderly, and I forced myself not to recoil from his touch. You're the most amazing woman I've ever known. I can't wait to be your husband. The wedding day arrived with unseasonably warm December weather. The Whitmore estate looked spectacular, exactly as David had described, though I now knew he'd had nothing to do with its restoration. Guests began arriving at 4 o'clock for the 5 o'clock ceremony. Emma and Jake had flown in the day before, along with my sister and a handful of close friends. David's children were there, looking excited to welcome me into their family. His ex-wife, Rebecca, had even come, which had seemed like a remarkably mature gesture at the time. But when I looked at the guest list with new eyes, I realized how small it was on his side. A few colleagues from his supposed firm, the friends who had welcomed me so warmly at their dinner party. How many of them were part of the con? At 4:45, 15 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to begin, there was a commotion in the main hall. Instead of the string quartet beginning the processional music, I heard voices, footsteps, official-sounding announcements. I was in the bridal suite with Emma and my sister when Patricia knocked on the door. "Sarah, it's time." The three of us walked downstairs together. In the ballroom, our wedding guests sat in stunned silence as two FBI agents approached David at the altar. "Marcus Thompson, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, and grand theft. You have the right to remain silent." The colour drained from David's face as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. He looked around the room desperately, his eyes finally finding mine. I walked toward the altar slowly, still in my wedding dress, still carrying my bouquet. "Surprise, darling," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did you really think I would let you steal from me the way you stole from Catherine Walsh, Jennifer Morrison, and Linda Chen?" The room was dead silent except for the sound of David's, Marcus's, labored breathing. "You made one critical mistake, Marcus. You assumed I was just another lonely widow who would be too humiliated to fight back when she discovered the truth. But you forgot to research exactly who you were dealing with." I turned to address our shocked wedding guests, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the dramatic turn this celebration has taken, but sometimes justice requires a little theatre." I looked back at Marcus, whose face had gone from charming groom to trapped animal in a matter of seconds. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'd built a successful career by being naive and trusting? You spent months studying me, learning my weaknesses, my desires, my vulnerabilities. But you missed the most important thing about me. I don't lose. Ever." The FBI agents began reading Marcus his rights as I continued. "3 weeks ago, my friend Patricia showed me your real identity. Marcus Thompson, professional romance scammer. 7 years of preying on successful women who'd lost their husbands. Catherine Walsh in Denver. You stole $2.3 million from her. Jennifer Morrison in Phoenix. $1.8 million. Linda Chen in Seattle. $3.2 million. Should I go on?" Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The man who had been so eloquent, so charming, so convincing, couldn't form a single word. "The Whitmore estate? Not your project. Morrison and Associates is doing the restoration, and yes, I called them. They've never heard of David Richardson. The wine expertise, memorized from sommelier websites, the art knowledge, downloaded from museum audio tours, even your children, hired actors from a Chicago talent agency. Emma gasped from the front row. Mum, those kids we met weren't his children. The woman he introduced as his ex-wife, another actress, the friends who welcomed me so warmly, part of his crew. The whole thing was an elaborate performance designed to make me trust him enough to give him access to my money. I walked closer to Marcus, close enough that only he could hear my next words. But here's what you didn't count on, you pathetic excuse for a man. I've been recording our conversations for the past 3 weeks. Every phone call, every dinner date, every time you talked about our joint bank account. The FBI has hours of evidence of you attempting to defraud me. His eyes widened in horror as the full scope of his situation became clear. I raised my voice again so everyone could hear. The $500,000 I supposedly transferred to our joint account? That was fake paperwork, Marcus. The real money is safely in my accounts, where it's always been. But your attempts to access it, your discussions about how we'd invest my money in your fake business ventures, all of that was recorded and handed over to federal investigators. The lead FBI agent stepped forward. Mrs. Johnson, thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Mr. Thompson, you need to come with us now. As they led Marcus away, he finally found his voice. Sarah, please. You don't understand. I do love you. What we had was real. I laughed, a sound that echoed off the ballroom's restored walls. What we had was a business transaction, Marcus. You provided entertainment, and I provided evidence for your prosecution. The only difference is that you didn't know you were being played. After the FBI left with their prisoner, I addressed my bewildered wedding guests. I know this isn't how anyone expected this evening to go, but I couldn't let Marcus Thompson continue destroying women's lives. Catherine Walsh, Jennifer Morrison, Linda Chen, they all trusted him the way I did. They all lost everything because they believed in love and second chances. I looked at my daughter Emma, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and admiration. I learned something important over the past 3 weeks. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I don't need a man to complete me or make me happy, that I'm capable of taking care of myself in ways I never imagined. My sister stood up and began clapping. Soon the entire room was applauding, not for a wedding, but for justice served and dignity preserved. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Marcus Thompson, whose real name was actually Michael Stevens, and who had multiple identities across several states, was convicted on 17 counts of fraud and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. More importantly, the investigation I helped enable allowed law enforcement to recover nearly $4 million that was returned to his previous victims. Catherine Walsh was able to rebuild her medical practice. Jennifer Morrison avoided bankruptcy. Linda Chen got back the money she'd intended to leave to her grandchildren. I received hundreds of letters from women who'd been targeted by similar scams, thanking me for fighting back instead of hiding in shame. Several major news outlets wanted interviews about how to recognize romance scammers. I even started giving occasional speeches at conferences for women in business about trusting your instincts and conducting due diligence in personal relationships, as well as professional ones. Emma quit her job in San Francisco and moved back to Chicago to help me start a foundation that provides resources for fraud victims and education about romance scams. Mum, she said, watching you take down that creep was the most badass thing I've ever seen. I want to be part of making sure other women don't go through what you did. Jake created a website for the foundation that includes a database of known romance scammers and red flags to watch for. You turned your worst experience into something that helps other people, he told me. Dad would be proud. And me? I learned that I don't need a relationship to feel complete. I have my work, my children, my friends, and most importantly, I have myself. I'm not closed to love if it finds me again. But if it does, you can bet I'll be running a background check. The empty house doesn't feel quite so empty anymore. It feels like mine. The woman in the mirror isn't waiting for someone else to make her happy. She's happy on her own terms. Marcus Thompson thought he was hunting a lonely, vulnerable widow. Instead, he met a woman who spent 30 years in boardrooms full of men trying to outsmart her, who built a multi-million-dollar career by being tougher and smarter than her competition. He thought he was the predator. He was wrong. Some days I still wear the vintage emerald ring, not because I miss him, but because it reminds me that even beautiful things can hide ugly truths. And more importantly, it reminds me that I'm the kind of woman who can turn a con man's own game against him. The last I heard, Marcus was teaching financial literacy classes to fellow inmates. Apparently, federal prison has an excellent continuing education program. I hope he's learning something useful. Heaven knows he needs new job skills. After all, his career in romance fraud is permanently over. And I made sure of that. The end.